Test, test, test. Okay. That was fun. Uh, Thank you all for coming. I see some friendly faces in the audience and some new ones. So really appreciate you coming by, even if you're just looking for a place to sit down after walking 4 miles through the building. I'm James Malley. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Paccurate. I've been focused on cartonization for about 12 years. So I think I can safely say I'm an expert in packaging optimization. And because packaging is connected to everything else in the warehouse, I have had to learn enough to be dangerous about other parts of the order to cash flow. Yeah, today we're going to be talking about packing control systems. If you've built anything like it, you may call it completely different, something completely different, but we call it a packing control system. And I'm going to go through today, a little bit of a spoiler, why all of a sudden packaging is deserving of its own 3-letter piece of software. Lord knows we have a lot of those, but why 2026 changes the game a little bit. And you'll have to forgive me if my voice cracks. I was at Big Bash last night screaming to be heard over the noise, and so if my voice cracks, I promise I'm not a 13-year-old with a gray beard. All right, so we always start with like, what crisis are we dealing with? At any one of these sessions, probably every session going on in all these theaters is starting with what crisis are we dealing with? And I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking only 3. And in fairness, it's because we have to submit these slides months in advance, and there's probably lots more, challenges that we're all facing in operations than are listed here. But these are pretty solid for the purposes of today's discussion. Transportation costs are rising. We say that every year. This year's different. It's the way that they're rising. The carriers are changing the rules, not just the rates. So apologies to anybody in the audience from UPS or FedEx. I promise I'm not picking on you, but it's worth stating that things like the rounding rules, where they kind of have abandoned traditional math. Previously, it was if you have a 10.5-inch box, they would round up to 11 inches, but if it was 10.4 inches, you would round down to 10. Well, they did away with that. Now it's 10.1 inches rounds all the way up to 11. So that's not a negotiable thing. That's a rule change, and it's significant. Combine that with new cubic surcharges, fuel surcharges, which many of you have probably noticed don't exactly track the price of fuel. They're a margin lever for the carriers. Again, apologies if you're here. And so this is a cost increase across the board, even for large shippers that have been able to negotiate their way out of a lot of GRIs. Compliance is coming. Right now, PPWR, if you've heard of it, massive legislative package in the EU that attempts to reduce packaging waste. There's a big focus on materials, but there's also a huge section in it about packaging efficiency. So if your box is not at least 50% full, you're getting fined on that package. That's a big deal. And there are at least a dozen US states that are putting together EPR laws of their own, and they're taking a lot of inspiration from PPWR. So this is something on the horizon. The folks building new locations in the EU right now are taking it into account in their designs. We may have to start doing that very shortly here. And of course, not to also pick on Gen Z, they have taken over the e-commerce consumer base pretty thoroughly at this point. They're the first generation that will actually change their buying behavior if they perceive waste. And in e-commerce, you don't get a store with beautiful lighting and a friendly associate to buy from. The only physical experience these folks have is the unboxing. And so it's a churn risk. And then automation. I don't think anybody would argue with me if you walk right back out this theater door. that picking automation has been thoroughly and is thoroughly addressed between AMRs and goods-to-person solutions. And there's some amazing technology out the door right there. And it's proliferated pretty widely. But what that has done almost universally is moved the previous bottleneck at the picking step down to pack out. So now I've got a new bottleneck, and the only real way I know how to fix it is just add more pack stations, which, okay, it kind of undermines the original ROI to an extent, right, of the labor savings at picking, but it also amplifies any inefficiencies I have at pack out, right? So these are some of the issues that we're facing. Okay, so I mentioned cartonization at the top as my area of focus for a very long time. Cartonization, I would venture a guess that at least 90% of the people in this room have heard of it. It is not a word in the dictionary, despite my fervent letters to Webster's over the years. But it's generally accepted as the feature or software that just tells you what box or boxes or mailers to use for any given shipment, right? The problem is, as a feature, as a supporting add-on, it is not, as far as what is typically in a WMS, it has not kept pace with the importance of pack-out. It tends to be relatively inflexible. What we always find out is that packers or their managers have had to solve things with process. So I have a whole category of fragile goods. Do I want to pay professional services, 100 grand plus, to make a couple line code change? Probably not. How about we just put some bubble on the bottom of every box and put an extra yard of craft paper around every object? Those solutions by way of process add up into kind of a debt. And so this is what, folks, especially if they've just implemented picking automation, this is like an uncomfortable truth that there's only so many times you can bring a basket of muffins to your IT team and bribe them to get, jump the line. And so there's a rigidity there that's a challenge. Apologies to the IT people in the crowd. All right, so not to kind of overstate it, but you could take a screenshot of this. I think the legacy solutions, as I said, they are just trying to give a helpful recommendation for what the smallest box or boxes are for any given shipment. What they don't do is optimize for your actual costs. And so this becomes insufficient when your actual costs are spiraling. And your CFO is suddenly getting involved and wants to learn more about your internal operations because suddenly the margin is shrinking. So in-depth feature sets for cartonization tend to be missing. We'll get more into that later. Okay, so all of these issues are why we see people building their own packing control systems. Again, sometimes they call them different things, and I'll go through the pieces we see repeated in this pattern of kind of DIY approaches to it. All of these things come together in this moment to make this less optional, certainly, than it has been in the past. Okay, so what is a packing control system? Besides another 3-letter software thing in the stack I have to remember. So consistently, we see these 3 things being key to getting pack out under control. You need good cartonization, so this is execution. You need it to be fast because you have a high throughput operation. It needs to be smart enough to look at all of your costs, whether it's crazy negotiated carrier contracts, labor costs, material costs, whatever the cost may be. Maybe you need to optimize your pack out and packaging for your brand new shiny AMR system. It's got to be able to look at all those things and make an intelligent decision, whether that's routing an order to stock boxes or mailers or to a pack size machine or an auto bagger or whatever it is. So that's execution, and it has to be flexible because your business changes. It can't be something that if you have an idea how to fix something, you're only met with friction. Monitoring, there's a surprising number of cartonization emergencies. You wouldn't think for something this kind of niche-y, but it usually starts with this phone call, an angry phone call, or a very concerned phone call from the CFO, who's the first to notice something go wrong in the balance sheet. You might hear it from the packers, who have been forced to adapt or ignore whatever packing instruction or SOP they were given because it doesn't meet the standard of their common sense. Monitoring, getting real visibility into what's actually happening at the pack station seems easier said than done, but over a decade of doing this, I have not had one meeting with an operations leader where they had a true understanding of what was happening at Packout. So that has to change. And then change in process management. So again, this is the recurring theme, control. It can't be that if you have a new category of SKUs where your head of customer success calls you up and says, hey, Dave, these are all showing up busted into a million pieces. You got to do something. The answer to that can't be, or shouldn't be, let me pay more money that's in my budget to make a code change. It just can't. Businesses change. You need to be able to respond to problems quickly. You need to be able to explore, maybe even simulate, if you're lucky, ideas to solve other problems of Packout. So these are really the three pillars. I would say as a strategy, there's actually kind of maybe a fourth unspoken pillar, which is data. For most cartonization, you need good dimensional data, which historically has been kind of a pain in the butt to collect. But the good news is it's gotten way easier. There's actually two pieces of good news. There is abundant now technology. You can even get handhelds that will dimension a complex SKU. They're more affordable now, and there's more tools to help you figure out, okay, what SKUs do I prioritize? If I've got 300,000 SKUs, if I need to go in and figure out what is it I'm actually shipping, there's more tools available widely now to make this easier. The other piece of good news is maybe you've tried to do a dimensioning, a data collection initiative before, but it could be expensive because there's labor. This is the time to ask for permission to do this. AI has caused huge executive awareness about the importance of good data. And so we see a lot of shippers lump this in under that theme and they get support for it. All right, so I've got a couple case studies. I think largely packing control system, PCS, or whatever, maybe if you've built something like this, you have your own code name for it. It is often a pain reduction kind of motivation you might have. It's like, I've got enough fires to put out. I don't need something as straightforward and repeatable as Packout to be another one that I constantly have to fix problems. Even if pain is the major motivation, the ROI on these kinds of projects is fantastic. You will always get support, even if transportation is in another department. Packaging is a really high impact lever to pull on to reduce costs. So these are a couple mid-market case studies, but you can kind of start to see, and I think we might have a couple of them at the back if you want to read more. So Altitude Sports complexity came from the SKUs. They have a wide variety of SKUs, a lot of labor turnover, and training time was like really difficult when you have really wide variety of SKUs. So they put the things in place they needed to make it a non-issue. It's like packers don't need to figure anything out because I can trust the system that is in charge of picking the right packaging. Daily Harvest, complexity, very different source. It's not, they don't actually have a lot of discrete SKUs. It's the packing requirements because they're a cold chain D2C brand. And similar thing where how do I how do I make sure that it's kind of high stakes? How do I make sure that everything is packed with the proper coolant? Because it's kind of worse than something showing up broken if it shows up rotten, right? So this is like a higher stakes customer satisfaction issue. And so they developed a packaging technology strategy with great results. All right, only a couple more slides here, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions. We touched on some of this, the automation ROI. It's not just making up for whatever bottleneck movement happened. If there's a bunch of examples of this, but if you have an AMR that you've deployed in a pick-to-box scenario, and you're able to further optimize your packaging, you can increase the ROI of the AMR deployment a lot. We've seen 30 to 50% increase in ROI just by making sure you can fit as much on the AMR shelf as possible. And it makes sense. Get work on the robot is kind of the mantra in building those business cases. Throughput, I think another thing that is a kind of a constant surprise to an organization when we finally talk to packers is how often repacks happen. And it could be any number of reasons. If you're tribal knowledge driven, it could be, oh, I thought this was the perfect box, because even really experienced packers still have a human brain, and humans are not particularly good at looking at three-dimensional space and understanding the most efficient way to put everything together. Or it could be the WMS is their cartonization is too simplistic. Maybe it's liquid fill. So there's like actually a huge throughput increase we see time and time again. We talked about compliance, sustainability. I mean, this is honestly the reason why I've been so focused on this one problem for over a decade. It's a special problem because how often do you get have your cake and eat it too sustainability initiative? This is one that saves money. It's not a big ask. Not to keep referring back to the CFO, but it's not a big pitch you have to make if you have a sustainability strategy. It's the same thing. The less you're spending on consumables because you're using only what you need, it has a huge cascade effect on your company's carbon footprint. And it's not just the materials. There's a funny thing about parcel shipping, especially in floor-loaded trailers. If you're able to reduce your average box size by 20%, it results in 20% fewer trucks going out the door at scale, right? Quick note on the automation side. In a couple hours, I'll actually be back in this theater with MHI's Slam group talking only about that, because this is like a really big topic. They got a lot of requests to talk about. It's called Beyond the Pick. So come back in a couple hours if you're interested in that. So just to sum up, the old kind of reality is rigidity, inflexibility. The new one is just got to be about putting the control in your hands as operations leaders. And somebody asked me outside, does IT have a problem with you kind of taking that away? And they're like, no. They are so happy they don't have to deal with another thing because they've already got, multi-year long roadmaps in a lot of cases. And with all of the cost pressures that we talked about earlier, packaging is really kind of like the final frontier. It's in SLAM. It's like at the end of the line. It's interconnected with everything. So now's the time to, if you don't have one, start investigating having a real meaningful packaging strategy, which ideally leads you to building or using a third party's packing control system. So this is the last slide. These are just some questions you could ask yourself, maybe talk to your colleagues about, is thinking about this in this way appropriate for our business? I think the only thing I would add to this is think back to the last time you had to make a change. Either maybe somebody from finance said, you gotta stop these DIM charges, you gotta figure this out, or maybe it was that, that whole category of items is showing up busted into a million pieces. What was it like to try to fix it? Did a whole committee have to get involved? Or was it as easy as pushing a button? That's all, folks. We definitely have time for questions. But if anything today made you think differently about a current problem you're having, please take a moment, scan that QR code, and give some feedback. Because if it's not terrible feedback, they will invite me back next year. So, which is, or in 2 years, or in Vegas, or in one of the 2 MODEXs, they will invite me back to. Any questions? There's a microphone standing intimidatingly in the center of the theater. If anybody has a question.